Hey guys, this is Mitch with FinePoint CGI, and today we're going to talk about Godot 3.4, which was released just over this past weekend, at least at the time of recording. So we're going to talk about some of the core features that Godot 3.4 is going to be giving us, and we're going to talk about all the cool things that it has, and we're just going to run through it and see what we find. So let's go ahead and get started. Okay, so the first major feature, and we'll kind of just go down through the list and I'll explain how they work and why they work and what use they have. The first major features is in the core section, and the first one is promote object validity checks to release builds. So this is exciting because how objects are handled is slightly different between debug and release. So I was helping a developer a while back who ran into a problem where objects were getting deleted before they were completely removed. And I ran into, or I guess he ran into some issues where he was calling is instance valid obj, but it was being handled differently between debug and release. And that inconsistency caused us a lot of problems. So this change here makes it so that they should work about the same, and in theory it might affect your performance a tiny bit with this new feature, but the ease of debugging makes it way better. So it's an awesome new feature and I'm glad to have it. The next big feature is large file support. So Godot can now handle up to 8.4 million TB bytes, which is basically a terabyte, more or less. It's 1024 gigabytes. So you can basically handle as big of a file as you could ever want. I don't think we're ever going to need to go above 8.4 million TB bytes. So I think we should be good there, but now we have that feature. Before, we only could handle up to 2 gigabytes in file size. So, or gigabit. And at times when you had like open world games or something like that, it could become it could be difficult. You'd have to split your scenes and do some funky stuff. But now everything has been set to unsigned 64-bit integers, which is going to solve that problem. So hopefully we'll never run into another, hey, this file's too big for Godot to handle. The next big feature is frame delta smoothing. So frame delta smoothing is a really cool change. Basically, the way the old system worked was it went off of your operating system clock, and how operating system clocks are handled is different based on the operating system and sometimes just in general. So there were times that Godot could be hitting a inconsistent delta, so it could mess up the smoothness of your game and basically could throw off your objects and throw things off from being, I guess, smooth, right? Whereas nowadays we have a frame delta smoothing, so it allows you to go off of your VSync and it uses a fixed VSync delta instead of the sampled input time that they were doing before. Now you can disable this. Let me bring up Godot and I'll show you. So if you open up Godot and you go up to your project settings, and you go down into your run section here, you can see that there is a delta smooth right here, and that is your delta smoothing option. So if you suddenly see that your project is not interacting the way that you were expecting it to, this is a good candidate for you to check out to see if maybe this is what's causing it. So just to keep that in mind, that is something that could be causing your game to have inconsistent smoothing between 3.3 and 3.4. This might be the culprit for you guys. So the next big one, which I am very excited to see, is improved input handling. So basically they set it up so that now you have some of these aliases here that allow you to handle all of your movement actions with just one function call instead of 4. So if you see this, you can see how there's 4 calls here, whereas here it just handles it. It does it all for us. So I'm really excited to see this change, because you can see like walk equals walk force input get axes. You can actually see right here, this just handles your controller support, and this one just handles your movement support up, down, left, and right. So it's a really great little feature that's going to really reduce our code for our movement code. And I can't wait to refactor the 2D character controller tutorial to have this new feature, because it's going to definitely simplify things. So if we scroll down a little bit further, we got cryptographic changes. Those cryptographic changes allow us to use AES ECB and AES CBC. So basically AES ECB is the first generation of AES, and CBC is the cipher block chaining, and it's a more advanced block cipher encryption. So it's a little bit more secure and a little bit better than the previous way of doing things. So now Godot can save and load public keys and sign and verify hashes and encrypt and decrypt RSA keys. So it's a huge change for us for securing our code and making secure communications between us and servers and things like that. So it's a very welcome change for anyone that's doing multiplayer or anything like that. It's going to help keep your games secure so that people don't, hack your guys' games and cheat and things like that. So it's a good change. So the next big section is rendering, and the big feature that comes with rendering right now is portal occlusion culling. So for those of us using the 3D section of the engine, this is a huge change for us, and it's awesome. So this allows us to cull objects that are not within the camera view and that is hidden by another object. So this is huge because it is going to reduce the amount of geometry that your game needs to render. Unfortunately, it's not the raster occlusion culling that's in Godot 4, but it is a really good way to occlusion cull, especially if you're creating a game that maybe is inside of some rooms or things like that. It's going to help with boosting your performance and making the 3D engine of Godot a little bit more efficient. And if you guys want to see a tutorial on that, I did do one. Link will be in the description below if you guys want to check it out. Things may have changed a little bit. I believe they did some updates after I did that tutorial, but it still is a good introduction to what this feature is. So if we scroll down a little bit more, we have the AES fitted tone mapper. So this is exciting because by default, Unity uses the AES fitted tone mapper, and it helps with keeping the brights bright, but without blowing out and overexposing your images. So if you take a look at this image here, you can see the sun is super bright, but if we go over to the new one, you can see how the sun is a little bit less yellow, a little bit less, a little bit of the detail is still in the sun, whereas the old one, it does not. And same thing up here, you can see a little bit more detail in the lights up here. So the new AES fitted tone mapper kind of helps keep the details in there when you're using it. So it's a good change that's going to help us create better looking 3D games. So if we scroll down, we also got the ring emitter for 3D particles. This is great because it allows you to, as the title says, make a ring of 3D particles. So this is good if you were to do like a tornado, or if you were to do like a portal, or maybe a fire spinning tornado of death or something. This is a very good add-on for Godot, especially if you're doing an explosion. If you're like exploding rock from a center point, you were just exploding it and blowing them away. This is useful. Instead of emitting from a single point, you can emit from a ring. And a lot of times that's what people do in visual effects, is they use a ring emitter. So it's a good addition to Godot. Now we got some shader language changes. Now I don't understand shaders, so please don't quote me on any of this, but it looks like they have some structs and fragment to light variance changes, and they also have a global const array. I don't know what any of that means, but that's cool. And they also added the time function as a built-in uniform, which basically means that it's available to you by default without needing to import anything. So that's cool because I mean, I don't know of a single shader out there that doesn't really use time or something like that if you're doing anything animated. So it definitely is a good change. It'll help our shader developers out there. Now, they did add some additional render improvements, octahedral map attribute compression. So basically, they can now compress normal maps and tangent attributes a little bit better, and it will help with making a more efficient game, more or less. They added support for CPU blend shapes. So if you guys don't know what a blend shape is, but basically think of like how Skyrim, when you are creating your character and you're kind of doing all those slides and it's sliding between the two different or the different mouth patterns. That's what a blend shape basically is. So you're sliding between these mouth patterns or these, skin or things like that. You can also use it for like animation or anything like that as well. So they added that to GLES 2. So that's really good for anybody on mobile or people who want to target the GLES 2 platform. They fixed the draw order of transparent materials for multiple directional lights. That's exciting because the draw order was kind of wrong and could produce inconsistent results, but now it's been fixed, so that's good. They fixed depth sorting on meshes with transparent textures, so that's cool because we had some issues with that where things weren't getting proper shadowing and stuff like that. So it looks like that handles that. We got a new inverse square light attenuation as an option. So if we go ahead and we take a look at that one, you can see how it's been kind of softened a little bit here. So you can look at this and you can look at this. You see how we got that nice soft gradient here, whereas before it didn't quite have that. So that's very useful. I'm glad to see that it exists. And wait, there's more. You guys can check all the rest of the changes in the changelog. Okay, so now that we got all the rendering and stuff like that out of the way, now comes some of the crazier changes. So on Android, this release of Godot is going to change our target API level. It's also going to change quite a few more things. So their change has made it so that API level 30 is our new target. That's required by Google Play. So now we won't need to make all these weird changes to get it to work with Google Play. It just natively has those changes. It does have some features for external storage access. I know some people have been asking about having external storage access with Godot. That's coming in Godot 3.5. It's not quite there yet. They did add in a little bit of Android's Play Asset Delivery, which if you guys don't know what that is, it's basically a way for Android to remove the original OOB format, which is a expansion format that Google Play used to send down expansion files. Now they're using AAB files for it instead. So the Godot team has laid the groundwork for that support that will hopefully be coming in the future. Now, one other major change is the agile input processing, which basically does a lot of input processing off on a different thread. So it will help with keeping your game responsive. Even if it isn't at a steady frame rate, it will try to keep your movement and your input processing as smooth as humanly possible. So it'll help keep your game feeling smooth, even if your frame rate is inconsistent. On the HTML side, there has been a lot of really cool changes here. So they added in support for progressive web apps, which if you guys want to hear more about that, I have a Godot 3.4 RC, I believe it was 2, where I talked about progressive web apps and the importance of this and how it works and why it works. The next big thing that was changed was the JavaScript object. I am working on a tutorial for this one, but basically it allows you to interact with the JavaScript API through Godot in a really simple way. You can just call javascript.getInterface and it'll actually pull that interface and allows you to use that interface. So it's really cool. So you can actually go out, fetch a JavaScript object and call on that JavaScript object as if it's a normal object inside of Godot. So it's a really cool feature and it's going to be useful if you want to integrate into your websites or if you want to use Godot to maybe do some additional calling outside of the Godot engine, or if you wanted to maybe download some files or something like that, you could do it through this system. And last but not least, they did some changes to the audio worklet, which basically was a multi-threaded build for Godot 3.3, which would solve a lot of audio playback issues that they have. But there are some browsers out there that don't support audio worklet and multi-threaded APIs. So they changed it so that the audio worklet could do single-threaded operation. So that's great. The only downside is the performance will not always be great, but I mean, it's better than not being able to hear your audio or any stuttering audio, right? It may be slower, but at least it works. So it's a really good feature that will help with some backwards compatibility for older web browsers. On the Mac OS front, we got a updated version of Mono, so we are now on 6.12.0.158 Preview Edition, which basically allows us to target Apple Silicon, which is really cool because before we were unable to do that. Now we can actually target Apple Silicon with our system using C#. They also added Apple's notarization process to Godot, which basically allows us to sign our code and allows us to get scanned by the Apple system. So that way they don't look at our code as viruses or things like that. So it's a very useful change for the Mac team. Over on the physics side of things, they did a lot of fixes and improvements here. It's all a bunch of small stuff for the most part, but they did add kinematic changes on how moving platforms works. So before we had to do some finicky stuff like, hey, if you're on a platform, have more gravity or less gravity, but now apparently it's a lot better. They added in some ray shape stability to the Godot physics engine, which is cool. So that should help with some stability issues, and it should make it so Godot crashes less often or has less issues. The next big change is a more reliable hull, convex hull generation. So before it would generate a very detailed convex hull, which was good because it's more accurate, but instead it now has a more efficient algorithm. So the nice thing about this is you can see here the original mesh of 4,000 or 40,000 vertices. If we come down here, you can see it is now getting your convex hull of 56 vertices. So when you are doing your physics calculations, you only have to worry about calculating this information and not this information. So it's a really great change because it's going to make your guys' 3D physics a lot better than what it was. Another big change is they added in 32 collision layers. So that's really cool. It basically means that now we can have up to 32 collision layers. So 16 is not very many, and having 32 makes everything just simpler for us. So they added in dynamic BVH for Godot Physics 2D, which should allow us to have a much more reliable and better performant 2D physics engine. So that's going to be a huge boost of performance for those of us who are using physics inside of our Godot 2D projects. And in the Godot 3D physics side, they did a bunch of improvements to help with performance and to help with some optimizations to make it run better. So these are all welcome changes, and I'm happy to see that they're still putting in these changes. Now, if we scroll down, the next section is the asset pipeline, and they now support exporting scenes as GLTF. So the nice thing about this is you can now export out your scene as GLTF and let another application like Blender or Unity or really any other program import it and use it for whatever you may need. So it's really useful if you run through and build your entire level in CSG meshes. Then you can export it and bring it into Blender and then start filling in the details with Blender and making it look nice. And then you can re-export it out of Blender back into Godot. So if you guys want to see how this works, I have a link to my Godot 3.4 RC to video where I talk about this feature in more depth and I show you how it works. This next change, lossless WebP encoding, is huge. So this format is an image format made by Google. It is a way more optimized version of JPEG and PNG. It has a better decompression time and it's smaller than PNG. So the nice thing about that is while your import times might be a little bit faster, your entire project as a whole is going to be smaller and your loading time will be reduced by a lot. Some people have been benchmarking it and saying that it's lopping off about 20% or so of time, which is good. I mean, so if something's going to take 100 seconds to load, that means that the WebP on average is about 80 seconds. And it's also been reducing the size of that image by a good solid almost half. So it's a really good feature and it's definitely worth the change for everybody inside of Godot. The next major change is a new theme editor. I am going to go ahead and make a video on this. If you can't wait, GD Quest actually made a video on this. But basically, if I open up Godot and I come in here and I add in a UI element, we'll just go ahead and throw a control element in here. If you come over here to theme and you click and you add in a new theme and you click on it, you'll see that we now have this fancy little box over here. And this allows us to do all of our theme edits for the most part in here. So if I come in here and I hit plus and I click on button, you could see that we can actually change our stuff here. Before it was all in here and it was a really big mess. If I open up, whoops, didn't mean to open that. If I open up this and I go ahead and click on my banner button, I go to theme, I add in a new theme, I click on it and I click edit, add item, and I add in a button, add. If I come in here, I can now change my icon. Let me see if I can. This is why this was a pain, by the way, if you guys are curious. We'll say color. So if I change my color to red, see, it's not liking it. Yeah, you guys can see how unfriendly this was. Let me add that. There we go. Add in a class instead. And then if I change the font color to something like red, you can see now it affects it, but it's all right here. Whereas the new system has it all right here. So I can come in here, change my font color, something like that. I can say, all right, I need to change my, my disabled. You can come in here and say style box texture. And you could click on this and then just drag in your icon and then go back to your theme and there's your change right there. So it's a welcome change. I think this area still needs a lot of work. I remember complaining about it when I did my theming video, and I'm going to build a more in-depth video on this, but it is better than what it was before. I still think it needs some work though. It'd be nice if everything was in here instead of in here. As much as I like the inspector, I don't like the inspector. I think we need to actually have a theme panel that has everything in here instead of some things in here and some things in here. We have some design inconsistency here, but it is a welcome change. The next big change is localized class reference. This isn't super useful if you speak English, but if you speak a different language like Chinese or Spanish or French, German, or Japanese, it will allow you to see the API reference in your native language. So that's a good change for people who don't speak English. And I think it's a good change. The more people that can read our interface and read our classes, the more people that are going to use Godot. So it's a good change. Some other general improvements, they added in a quick load option to load resources from the inspector. So this is really cool, actually. If I come over here and I click on my style box texture, I'm going to add in a texture. I can now click quick load right here. If I click on that, it will actually filter out my entire favorite section here to only show the thing that matches the type that field is looking for. The next big change is allow you to create a node at a specific position. So if I go back to Godot, I can control right click here and I can add node here, and I can add in like a control node and it adds it here instead of adding it up here. If I right click up here and I add in a control node, you'll see that it adds it here, right? But if I control right click, add node here, and I add in a node 2D, you'll see that it added it right where I right clicked. So this is great for when we're doing UI designs, instead of us needing to, create the node, move it to where we want it and things like that. We could just control right click and then go ahead and add our nodes. We can also instance scenes, and you can see if we instance a scene, I could actually instance a scene into that location as well. So it's a really good change, especially if you're doing a lot of population of like enemies and things like that. You could just control right click, instance your enemy, and you're good to go, instead of doing it the previous way. So it's a good feature. The next big change is the new export templates manager. Most of you guys are probably not going to use this, but if you guys go up to editor, manage export templates, you can see that we got a whole new section here. So you can actually see all of your installed version of your export templates. You guys can see what your current version is. You guys can actually download and install your export templates, or you could just install it from a file. So this is a big usability improvement compared to how it used to work. If we go back to the older version of Godot, if I go to editor, manage export templates, you can see that it just shows you what version you have installed, and you can re-download it or uninstall it. And that's pretty much it. And as much as this is great, it's definitely not as good as the new way of doing things right here. So it's a welcome change that is going to be way easier for those of us who use lots of export templates. It'll make it way easier for us to work with. The next one is make several actions in inspector dock more obvious. I can show that one off as well. If I click on like my control node here and I come over to my right, you can see immediately something is different with your inspector. It's not quite noticeable if you don't look at the previous version, but something has changed over here. If you actually open up Godot 3.4 and you pull this back a tiny bit, you can see that some things have changed here. So the first thing, did you know if you click on this, it'll actually show you the class that this thing came from, right? So this one has theme inside of it. You can see that there's a theme right here. Did you know that actually existed? Because I didn't know it existed. I never even knew this existed. It never crossed my mind. And did you know if you click on here, you can actually open up your help? That will actually take you to the Godot documentation. I didn't know that either. So this is stuff that was kind of hidden, but now with the new version, you can see you have this little down arrow here, and you can see that you have all of the themes and all of the things down here. So you can actually click, and it'll take you down to those sections. So you can actually come in here and say texture, and now you can see the texture. You can back up and you can click and go to theme, and you can now go right straight to your theme. And it just makes Godot way easier to use. Whereas previously, I didn't know this even existed. It didn't even look like it was something you could click on. And also they made the doc button very much apparent now. So you can just click it and get the documentation, which is a welcome change in my opinion. The next big change is they improved the 3D editor manipulation gizmo. So if I go scene, new scene, I add in a 3D scene, you can see our little 3D manipulation gizmo right here. The major changes, if we actually go over to Godot and we go and add in our 3D manipulation gizmo, you can see that the lines are smaller. So you can see how they're smaller. You can also see that there's no little box in there. And the little box is kind of like the spatial nodes rotation. So it's like a little fake box that you can see what the rotation is of the spatial node. So it's really useful. And they did some other improvements where if you just kind of hover over the general area, it'll actually let you move the object. Same thing with if a 3D object exists, you can kind of click in the general area and it'll allow you to move it. So it's a really nice change, and it definitely will make Godot a little bit easier to use for 3D users. And they did some improvements to the animation Bezier editor, but I can't get any of the snapping stuff to work, so I guess your mileage may vary. But according to the Godot devs, if I go ahead and click on it, they did some snapping of some Bezier handles. They allow for precise snapping. They did some readability changes, and they made everything a little bit more consistent, which is good. The next major change is the animation reset track. So this is cool. And basically it allows you to have a reset value that is the default value that the scene uses. So what's nice about that is when you create an animation, so if I go to animation player and I add an animation player and I add in a CSG mesh, if I add in a CSG mesh and I go ahead and I click on my animation player, I add in a new animation, new anim, and then I click on my CSG mesh and I go ahead and put in a translation, use Bezier curves. You can see that we have a new reset, and this reset is what is defaulted when you save your scene. So you will no longer have to deal with you dragging this over. So if I kind of drag this over here and let's put this at 1, put this at 1, drag this over here and create a keyframe. So now I got an object that's moving to the right. If I go to my reset animation, it will always be the same, right? It's always the first keyframe of my animation. So the nice thing about this is if you set values or things like that with your animation player, like I do a lot of times when I do my stuff, this reset will no longer affect scenes above it, if that makes sense. So if I forget to leave my animation on frame 0, it won't affect scenes that use this scene, if that makes sense. Because previously it would save that, hey, you know, they were on frame 0.06. So when you play your game, it starts from 0.06. Whereas now it should start from the beginning, and it will solve a lot of small problems that Godot was having. They added a 2D viewport scale factor. Now, I can't find it in the project settings. I was looking for it earlier, but basically, if I can find it, what it does is it allows you to have a scale your interface by a value. So basically, if you're on a higher resolution screen, Godot had some issues where it wouldn't scale proportional to the size of the screen necessarily. So sometimes your UI elements would be smaller than what they should have been. So this basically allows you to have it auto scale to a specific value for you to make it so that your user interface is a little bit more readable than what it used to be. So it is a welcome change, and you know, honestly, I think it's going to be useful. They did some changes to the CSG polygon. So basically, you can now do angle simplification, some UV distance changes, and path intervals. I've never used this, so don't quote me, but basically they just added some additional stuff where you can subdivide your path, and instead of it subdividing the entire path evenly, it'll subdivide only the sections that need to be subdivided. So if you have a straight line, it won't subdivide it, but if you have a curve, it'll subdivide that section instead. So this will make it a little bit more efficient. It'll reduce the amount of polygons that you need to create your bend in your polygon. And that's basically it. I mean, there's a lot more changes that they have, but that's the primarily big changes that's going to be going into Godot. So it's a huge change, and there's a lot of cool stuff. One of the things that I wish they would have shouted out is you now need Java 11 instead of Java 8. And they did update a bunch of Android SDK stuff, so it would have been nice if they would have called that out, but that is something else to keep in mind. If I actually go out to the exporting Android section here, they actually changed your Android SDK version and NDK version to be a newer version. They also require OpenJDK 11. They used to require OpenJDK 8, if I remember correctly in my previous tutorial. So I'm probably going to need to update that tutorial to account for all of these changes. But that's something to keep in mind, is if you upgrade to 3.4, make sure you upgrade your SDK and you upgrade to OpenJDK 11. So what do I think about all of these changes? Honestly, I think they're all pretty welcome changes. I know there's a lot of people who think that a lot of the changes that are happening in Godot 3.4 and soon to be 3.5 is a bad thing because it's taking away from Godot 4 development. And I can understand some of the frustration in that, but I do think that it's good for us to address some of 3.x's problems, right? There are problems that Godot 3 has that is great that they're fixing, and there are a lot of people out here that have production code out there that, you know, needs to be reliable. And there are people out there that have shipped apps with the Godot 3 system. So for us to completely abandon the 3 series in favor of Godot 4, in some ways is a bad thing. But I can also see where people are upset because, you know, Godot 4 has been in development for a long time, at least as long as I can remember, for at least a year. And, you know, I can understand some of the frustrations there. But what do you guys think? Do you guys think that this is a good release? Do you guys think that Godot 3.4 is a bad thing? Let me know in the comments below, because I'm more than interested. I want to have a good discussion about this and see what you guys think. But that's all I have for you guys today. So if you like this video, go ahead and hit that like button. Hey, you know, if you dislike this video, go ahead and hit that dislike button, because I am here to make content for you guys. And if you guys want to discuss this in a more longer form conversation, go ahead and hit me up on our Discord. Link is in the description below. I'm more than happy to talk to you guys about just about anything. You know, I always like hanging out with you guys. But that's all I have for you guys today. So thank you so much again for watching, and I will see you all next time. Thanks.